PS360 Plus is the newest arrival in multi-console PCB technology. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get installing it. So, go ahead and get started by opening up your case. This is just done by using a 3mm hex wrench and just unscrewing the 6 screws on the top of your TE. Once it's ready to get off, just pull up on the joystick, and there you go, ready to mod. On the 360 version, I use my plier end of my wire strippers, and I jiggle the harnesses out of place. This helps move it out of place because there's a little bit of sticky glue that just holds it in there. Do this until you remove the last harness. After this, there's a little bit of red glue that I just remove with a flat-bladed screwdriver, like so. Pop off the last of the evil red screw glue. Now you're free to unscrew the screws without worrying about messing them up with the evil screw glue. Unscrew all 4 and your original PCB is almost ready to be removed. All that's left to do is cutting the USB cable. If you're using a 360 PCB, be sure to save it. It's actually quite valuable and you can sell it again on the SRK trading forum or keep it for yourself for a future mod. On the 360 version, the harnesses are going to be on the bottom, and in both cases we're going to utilize these harnesses and screw them into the PS360 Plus to connect the buttons. You can look at them and they'll be clearly labeled on the 360 version, and there's also a red wire and it follows down from there. Now, in the PS3 version, all you have to do is cut the USB cable. You don't have any harnesses to deal with, except for with the joystick, which is plugged in underneath the turbo panel like so. I just kind of use my fingernail to wedge it out of place. Also, because the turbo panel is the PS3 PCB, we can't really remove it like in the 360 version. In the PS3 version, the harnesses are up top and they're not as nicely labeled. However, I'll have a link in the description for the order of these, and you can cut them directly off of the turbo panel PCB. For this basic install video, for the most part, the installation methods will be the same, so I'll be focusing on the 360 version. Now I cut off the harness at the harness end that went to the PCB, and then I spread out the wires just a little bit so I can work with them. And after that point, I take my wire strippers, and as you see, I follow the red one, and then I just strip the original wire off of it, like so. After stripping it, I use a little loop over technique where I bend the wire into a loop. This helps it screw down better because it gives it a little more surface area. This first red wire is the A button, and if you look up the PS360 documentation that I'll link in the description, this corresponds to the first kick. So after unscrewing it to loosen it, I put in the looped over wire and prepare to screw it in. I admit it gets a little bit out of focus right here, but you can still see the general idea of just taking a small flat-headed screwdriver and tightening it down. The wire next to that is screwed in the exact same way, only it is screwed into the 2-kick screw terminal. You can just follow it down the line and see that it is the B button. After doing this with all 5 of the wires from this harness, you're ready to move on to the second harness. The hang of the looping and stripping process, you'll realize you're just doing it for every single wire. Now, if you have a TES, you'll realize that there will be an extra wire called KGND, or kill ground. It's a unique feature for the start and select locking. I'll save this instruction for the advanced install video, but for now, if you don't care about the lock switch, all you have to do is screw it into normal ground on the PS360 Plus. Once you have all the wires screwed in, all the buttons, and a single ground, you're ready to move on to the joystick. Starting at this end of the harness where it has these little jagged points on it, I'm going to cut this first wire. Then I'm going to strip it. And I do this in a specific order because this first one is going to go to ground. And it is really easy to get these all mixed up since they're all black wires. That's why I try to do this one by one instead of cutting the whole harness. You're probably pretty used to this process by now, but again, all you do is screw it down. You don't necessarily have to loop it over. The wire is a little bit thicker now. Directly next to ground is the right direction, which also corresponds directly next to the ground that I screwed the original ground wire into. The directions will start directly after a ground, which is where I screwed the ground wire for the joystick. When you follow this pattern, the third wire that you cut will be directly next to the right, which means it'll actually be the left direction. And then it will be the up, and then finally the down direction. So that's why it's pretty helpful to do these wires one by one. Just repeat this process until you have all 5 joystick wires screwed in. If you screw in the 5th joystick wire, you're done wiring it up and you just need a USB cable. Once all of this is finished, I actually placed the circuit board where the original 360 circuit board went. And then I use one of the original screws and screw it into place to hold it. Another advantage the 360 version has is the microphone can be reused on the PS360 Plus. Just plug in the original harness and you're good to go. Now, if you can't solder it all, you can just simply buy a USB B to A cable and plug it into your PS360 Plus and you're dual modded and ready to go. However, the large end will mean that you need to drill a hole slightly larger to get it through. Since I don't really want to drill this case quite yet, I'm going to reuse the original USB cable. There are 4 points here labeled G, D plus and minus, and V that you could solder a USB cable to. Now, I tried to solder it from the top, and as you can see, the harness is getting in the way a little bit. On the back side, you can just flip it over and find the corresponding letter. G needs to go to the thin black wire, D minus to the white wire, D plus to the green wire, and V to the red wire. The thick black wire is shield ground and is completely unnecessary, so you can go ahead and cut that wire. And again, you don't need to solder this, I'm just doing it to reuse the original USB cable, and so that I don't have to drill my case quite yet. Once I messily solder on the last joint, I'm ready to seal up my case. Case closed. At this point, you're just ready to go ahead and screw back on all of the 6 screws on top, and then you're ready for a test. Now, the guide button won't work in this setup, and you'll need to use Start plus Select to emulate the guide button. I'll have full details on how to use the turbo panel in the advanced installation. If a single button isn't working, it's likely that the connection of that button on the screw has gotten a little bit loose, and sometimes they do tend to slip out of place. So double check it and make sure that it's screwed in properly. If 2 buttons are switched around, then all you should have to do is switch the places that they are screwed in. Reference which button they are by looking at the circuit board where the harnesses were, and then switch them around accordingly. If one of your joystick directions isn't working, same deal as the buttons, check your connections, make sure they're tight, make sure a wire didn't accidentally slip out. If only one joystick direction works, then the likely cause is that the ground wire is screwed into that joystick direction, and the joystick direction is screwed into ground. So switch those two around, and then you'll know that ground is there. Similarly, if two joystick directions are swapped, just like the buttons, switch them around until they work. If none of the buttons or none of the joystick directions work, then check the ground wires for each one and make sure that they're properly screwed in. Additionally, if neither of them work at all, then you may have a USB cable connection issue. Try plugging it into a PC and seeing if it recognizes the PCB. If not, then your USB connection is likely bad.